I don't find a whole lot of enjoyment in the grind myself. And so one way you can think about the way I play is I'm giving up maybe, a 0.5% to, 1% or so extra house edge. But in so doing, that's the price of me actually doing something that I enjoy.
Now that you're past 8, you're getting closer to the 7.
50% of hands from first come out roll to final 7 out, almost exactly 50% of those make it past the 6th roll. That what people want to say is, okay, now that we've got past this tipping point, all of a sudden the 7 is looming or something, or it's more likely to show up. That's not true. 50% of the rolls that make it that far do it again.
All right. Welcome to another episode of Fireside Craps with John here from Pro Craps, and along with my good friend JB, otherwise known as Myopia Movie. JB, how you doing?
Good, my friend. Good to be here again.
Hey, good. And I got the sound to work the first time too, which is we got the.
They don't know that it took us 30 minutes collectively the first 2 times, but yeah, smooth sailing this time.
That's funny. So since last time we talked, I got a bunch of math questions kind of tooled up here in my head. But I want to come right at you with something, which is last time we talked, you went deeper into your betting schedule, and people are like, "Whoa! Here's a guy who is a math teacher, professor, expert, knows all the math, understands house edge, understands all that stuff, but you don't really play that way." And I would love for you to talk a little bit about why that is, because I think there's some interesting reasons in there. And yeah, go for it, man.
Sure. It's going to get a little deeper. I guess each time we'll peel back a layer, which is fine with me. And maybe doing this all at once would be a little much for some listeners. But the real crux of the reason I play the way that I do is sort of twofold. The first is that the slightly more grindy way of playing, whether that's pass line or don't pass line odds and things like that, which I do. I still take odds when I make a pass line bet and things like that. Let me be clear about that. But I don't find a whole lot of enjoyment in the grind myself, and so one way you can think about the way I play is I'm giving up maybe, a 0.5% to, 1% or so extra house edge. But in so doing, that's the price of me actually doing something that I enjoy. So there's a purely sort of self-contained psychological element for me. The second piece of the information, so that's kind of like why I make the types of bets that I do. I think one of the things that also strikes people a little funny is the level of aggression that I incorporate. And to answer that, we have to take a little bit of a detour into, I guess, what an economist would call utility theory, which is basically, you can think of every person as trying to make decisions that maximize, we would call it an objective function in economics, but that's a little bit too nerdy and deep into the weeds. But just think about making decisions that make you happy on some dimension. Now, that can be as literal as this amount of money is better than a smaller amount of money, but that also incorporates other things too, right? You get utility or enjoyment or happiness or whatever in a broader set of circumstances. Most people in the world, almost everybody, exhibit something called risk aversion. What risk aversion means in the very technical sense is that if you are given the choice to flip a fair coin, right, where you would double your money if you win and lose if you don't, but a perfectly EV neutral bet, you would just prefer not to flip the coin. That's how most people respond. So what that looks like in the mathematics of it all is that people's utility functions exhibit a curvature, which means if you're going to make me gamble, I'd rather not. And so what that looks like is something called a certainty equivalent, which is where I would give up a very small amount of money to avoid having to gamble. And there's all sorts of interesting bits and pieces. Now you can think about how if we're going to flip a coin for $1, then most people would say, well, that's not that big a deal. I'll flip the coin because who cares, right? It's not enough money to worry about. But if we're going to flip a coin for $1 million, people suddenly go, well, no, wait a minute. I can't afford either psychologically or economically to lose that coin flip, even if it's fair, even if half the time I wind up with 2 million, I can't afford to do this. And so they avoid it. The level to which people will avoid those types of things is their risk aversion. I do not have a normal person's level of risk aversion. When it comes to my entertainment budget, I am honestly risk seeking, which is a very
Mhm.
strange thing. What that means is my curvature works the other direction. If you said to me, for amounts of money that are to me not going to change my life one way or the other, would you rather flip a coin or not? I'm always going to flip it. I'm sort of an action junkie along those lines, right?
Right.
So yeah, in fact, if you said, I mean, this is going to sound weird, but if you said that I could pay a very small amount of money to continue playing the coin flipping game, I still would, even though I'm sort of losing by definition. Like, even if the coins
Right.
fail,
So it
I pay
costs
a
you
small.
if it costs you 1 cent to play the quarter flip game every single
Yes,
time,
I
you're
would,
burning a penny every single time. That's your vig
because I
essentially.
like to flip the coin. Now,
Right.
people who, so there's all the, as you grow in your level of sort of sophistication in this stuff, that goes from sounding like an absurd thing to it sounds to most people like it's irrational, because people
Right.
want to go, look, why would you pay to flip a coin? You know you're going to lose. And I said, of course I know I'm going to lose. The only difference between me and everybody else at the craps table, or many people at the craps table, is that I've already come to terms with that. This game, even when played perfectly optimally to minimize house edge, is still paying a small amount of money to flip a theoretical coin.
Hmm.
And so I guess what's so funny to me is I don't understand why people take such exception or get so blown away by that. I think what happens is that there are some people who think they've cracked the code, right? They either because they've been very fortunate in their dice playing endeavors,
Hmm.
or because they don't fully understand what's going on with the mathematics, they believe that there is a way to dance through the raindrops and be a winner over really, really long time frames. And I believe there isn't one. And so once I've come to terms with that, this now looks like, well, I'm willing to take on a level of aggression that's different than most people. Fine. I don't risk money that I can't afford to lose. So my what taking those two things as given, the only thing that makes me interested in playing is trying to hit a home run of some kind. Now I understand most of the substantial majority of the time I won't be a winner on a given day or week or
Hmm.
month or whatever. But I know that going in. The only difference between me is that I sort of arrive at the same place in a way that's much more volatile, right? And so, yes, my swings would turn most people's stomachs, and that's okay. That's why I tell people not to do the things that I do. But if you have the bankroll that I have and you have the level of risk appetite that I do, this is a it's no more irrational than what other people do. There just aren't ways, especially when you have things like maximum. If there was no maximum on the amount of odds that you could do, I would do exactly what I do, except I would put bet every number and just press the odds. And I think
Hmm.
people would mostly leave me alone about it. But where
Sure.
I play, I have 20 times max odds. And so, I'm not going to start making a $5,000 flat bet or something like that, right? So it
No,
doesn't
but
it doesn't make
so
any
even at that,
sense.
here's kind of a dumb question. But even if you're going to put bet and max the odds at about 6, 7 times odds, I think it's mostly six for most numbers. You're better off putting in maxing than you are placing the number. So at 20x odds, some number, whatever the base bet is, 50, $100 with your max, as you press the odds up, you are better off doing that at some point.
Yeah, yeah. I suppose I could. And it would look like the where it would. And this is going to sound really strange, I guess, to some people, but I run into in that in that strategy, I am going to run into the table max faster because I'm doing 20x my flat bet every time. And so if I
Mhm.
win, if I start with, I don't know, a $50 flat and $1,000 odds or something like that, or 25 flat and 500 odds, it's only going to take two or three. I mean, it's really there's sort of no buildup, and there's not really the ability
Mm.
to kind of start relatively slow but still work my way up. I mean, I guess I
I mean, you
could do
could
that.
go. It depends on your house, right? The house that you're playing at. Mine, I know, will let me go. I can go at half table max on my put bet flat, and then I can max the odds from there. So I can go 250, and I can max the odds 10x odds from that point. They won't let you go any further than that.
Yeah,
The odds can exceed table max, but the flat bet can't. And they cap the flat bet on those things.
yeah. I guess I should
So
probably ask. I mean, I do put bets occasionally. Usually, once I get to the table max on a place bet, it starts to go
right.
both ways, and so I'll either move it to a put bet and then start building the place bet back up, or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some of it is really just a rhythmic thing too. Like I just kind of get used to the levels that I press, 300 to 500 to putting 200 on the floor. And it just kind of
Yeah,
like a little bit of a dance
you're kind of
where,
in a routine, right?
yeah, and all the dealers are doing it too. And yeah, I could probably scrape together a couple $1,000s a year
Mm-hmm.
of EV back from doing it slightly different. And maybe,
And
maybe
that's
at some point
I
I
think
will,
that's
but
the question. So there's the question, right? And I think this is where people would ask me to ask you this question, which is, let's say you got a place bet on the five. What is that, 4.5% edge or whatever that is, right?
sure.
And a come bet that goes to the five with your max odds, of course, is way less edge than that. So that's the question. It's the amount's not really the issue, I don't think, right? Because you, like you said, a put with a bunch of odds or a come with a bunch of odds. Um, why somebody who has, like, those percentages matter, right? The
Yeah,
house
they
edge
do.
does matter, and the
They
bigger the
do.
bets get, of course, the percentages widen. They don't widen, but the dollars associated to those bets become tangible dollars. It isn't 54 cents or 45 cents per hundred. It becomes 450 at some
Sure.
point, right?
Yeah.
Why not seek out the smaller house edge wherever you can, or like you say, it doesn't really matter at the with your risk appetite. It doesn't matter. Is
Well,
that the reason for that, or
well,
like,
it's
why not
not, I
seek it out?
mean, I think it's a perfectly fair question. And it's not that it doesn't matter because obviously, even if it's a penny a roll, as much as
Mm-hmm.
I add up a bunch of pennies, it's a non-negligible amount of money at the end of a year or
Mm-hmm.
2 years or 10 years or whatever. So I certainly don't
Sure.
want to leave it with saying that it sort of quote unquote doesn't matter. So the next layer of the equation for me is, so if you are someone who only plays, for example, pass line max odds, um, check your player ratings and
Mm-hmm.
rebates and offers and things like that. They are calculating those as a function of their implied take on you, right? Most
Right.
places call it an average daily theoretical, which is
Yeah.
kind of like the cumulative house edge in dollar terms for the amount of time that you play. And obviously that's a function of what you do. Someone who
Sure.
puts 25 pass 500 odds, their average daily theoretical is going to be $15. Now I don't know how much detail I want to get
I think
into
that's, to me,
right
the one of the
now.
most to me that's one of the most bullshit calculations ever. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but I've thought about this a lot, right? So if I'm dropping 25 and 100, let's just say 25
Okay,
and
sure.
100, right? I got 100 and a quarter at risk out of my pocket, right? And I'm being rated for the 25 only because the odds,
Well, in
they
expectation, you
say,
don't have that 100 at risk. That's how the casino
well,
looks at it.
I get you, right? So they're
Sure.
looking at the potential take on the $25. Okay, so they're 1.4%, but they're rating me on the flat, the amount flat, right? The guys that are betting across had the same dollar amount, 110 inside versus 10 with 100 is the exact same risk,
Yeah.
dollar for dollar.
Yeah.
They're rated at 110, right?
Correct.
That's the ADT is based on the 110. And here's
Yeah.
where I call bullshit on the casino on this one. What's the actual take that the casino is looking at there? The average take of the 110, their actual take, house edge speaking, is the percentage. It's $2.50 between the whatever that is, the average house edge between those bets that are out there.
Sure. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the actual rating, should be based on that.
Well, it is.
Fine,
Well, I mean,
right? If they're
I
giving
guess.
you, I've asked though, what am I rated at? You're rated at 110. Okay, cool. Or 150 or whatever the number is.
Right.
Like, great, that's fine. When I'm doing a Molly, they're like, "Hey, you rated at $50." I'm like, well, that's to me. If they're going to rate you based on their take, it should be based on the actual house edge that's out there at a
So,
given time, and that's what I'm hoping that they would do. But it'll never happen, and that kind of
well,
sucks. And I can get,
I, well, I can't speak to your individual casino. I can
mm-hmm,
tell you, that for me, it's a significant enough endeavor for me to know a little bit more detail into how they do it. And
mm-hmm.
no one's going to open the exact algorithm or whatever
Right,
for
right,
you, but I can say with certainty, at least for me, in the places that I play, that my rating, points accumulation and offers and all the stuff that comes from that is a function of my bets times the house edge that they're out there. So
mm-hmm,
in your example, the pass line only player is getting, they are according to the casinos, most casinos, the way they do it, they are basically, the casino looks at the 25 flat 100 odds as I'm going to win whatever 1.4% of $25 is,
sure,
37 cents or whatever.
mm-hmm,
And so, and now there's another factor is like how slow is the game moving, or how on average how many of those bets do you make, and you get credit for basically 37 cents per, per one of them. And the person who goes 110 across is getting, like you said, let's call it 2% for round numbers.
right,
2% times 110, it's as if they lost $2.20. So even though when you both lose, you lose the same amount of money on, you play this game in win craps or over,
mm-hmm,
100 million rolls, that person, the person who's betting 110 across, loses a way more than you do. And so that's why they get more points. We don't have to get into the super nitty gritty details of my personal point values or whatever, but I get
right,
millions and millions and millions of points a year. And so there is, I mean, I don't know the answer to this question. Maybe I should. Maybe your question sort of begs the answer to it. But between the actual rebates, offers, and comps and stuff that I get taken care of throughout a given year, I between all of those, I don't know how much of that. What is that number compared with how much more EV do I give up in a given year? I don't know the relative value of those
mm-hmm,
two things, but for me, I enjoy. I don't really take maximum advantage of it, but I get a decent amount of fringe benefits that close the gap, at least we can say, between the EV that's lost by placing versus putting with odds and so on and so forth. But um, yeah, I mean, I would imagine I'm probably still coming out slightly behind in that way, but I don't know. These are just the way. I mean, yeah,
yeah.
I guess that's relatively the way that
It's interesting.
it's
I mean,
always been.
I
Yeah,
don't know. I've got these strong feelings on the comp system anyway. I mean, I have cars and I do and play for the comps and everything else, but I just feel like when comp play dominates your purpose, it changes your play. I've seen too many people make dumb decisions to get a toaster or get a couple of nice free. I mean, I
well,
over
yeah,
time, I
yeah,
guess that it makes sense, and you're getting, it's knocking down some of the edge back to you, some percentage of what you give up in house edge back to you, but at the same time, you're also thinking about it. I got to get down there and play another few hours. I got to drop bigger
yeah.
bets. That I got to buy in for more. And that I think it changes. And for those of us who, you know, not that your money doesn't matter, but like losing a few $100 matters big to some folks, right?
Sure.
That's a decision that they're making. It's like, well, there goes. It's just that whole system just feels a little slimy to me. The way that
Well,
they
it
do it
is, and
now.
I mean, it is right, and that's why they put the thresholds where they put them. That's why they look. I joke all the time about, I've got in my one of my rooms in my house, I have like a $25,000 free TV. That's what I call it. Like,
Mhm.
you lose them $25,000, you earn enough points for they give you the television. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I could have
Yeah.
just bought the TV for $600 or what. Of course, like
Yeah. Totally.
the way you have, if you are trying to do it just so that you can get the rewards, that's a very bad way to look at it. Outside
Hmm.
of this following very specific example, there's
Yeah.
something called the sunk cost fallacy in business. And so, this idea that you shouldn't make decisions based on what's already happened, basically. So if you are, for example, at a Caesar's property, look, Caesar's calls the offers they give you reinvestment for a reason. Okay. That's the
Mm-hmm.
internal vernacular that they use, which is a euphemism for like bait on the hook, basically. So if you are, I don't know, diamond or about to be
That's
a
funny.
diamond or about to be a 7 star or whatever, like if
Yeah.
it's December 28th and you're 75 points away from the next level, it probably does make sense to actually go grind some video poker, do something to get the 75 points. Cause the worst thing is to get almost all the way there and then not get any of the benefits, falling just a few points shy. But outside of that, yeah, I agree. You should never play for comps. I will say that there are sort of at least two sort of, I don't know what to call them, tiers, I guess, of the comp system. And once you get to a certain level, sometimes, I mean, we all can like print the free bet coupons out or whatever, but sometimes the way they do those things is handled differently above a certain level, I guess is the kind of very vague way to put that. And every casino company is different, but my comp calculation is probably not the same as everybody's. But yeah, at the same time, I should never be trying to get points. I mean, I often end up with points and I don't even know what to do. I mean, I think for whoever does the Ameristar family of casinos, I had something like 8 million Boyd points at the end of last year, and I got those in like 6 months. I didn't even know what to do with. I was like, what? I can't. I
Right.
mean, there's only so many free hamburgers you can turn your points in for, or whatever, right? So
Right. Or rooms or whatever.
I turn those into free bets or whatever, to get extra rebates or whatever. But yeah, the
Sure.
calculation is that closes the gap, but the point still stands. I think it's a fair point to say that you know what I should do if the only thing I cared about was the EV. I should just start, and instead of placing inside numbers, I should put all of them, and every time they
Mm-hmm.
hit, change the odds a little bit here and there.
Yeah. Well, and at the amounts that you and you know and I think people have this other misunderstanding. You're not running up there and dropping, 1280 across out of the gate. Like that's not what you're doing. But you're building up to that on an aggressive pressing method. I think you'd have to rework some
Well,
of these
sometimes
rhythms
sometimes it
to,
starts at 1200, but yeah, I get your point.
you know what I'm saying? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's not
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
but yeah, refactoring kind of the way that you do your press routine. I think it would probably, and again, when you get into those numbers, thousands changes that house set is bigger.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
getting you're
oh,
getting like
absolutely.
like $50, per versus $2 or whatever.
Yeah,
Um, adding zeros, right? Adding zeros matters at some point. And I think you're betting at levels where the zeros do matter actually on the edge. So, but I
it
guess we get to
does.
the
Yeah.
point. So the way that you play, and I think this is kind of cool. We can talk a little bit about variance because you said earlier you're just like swinging for the home run, right? And
Sure.
and I think there's that, and I talk about this on my shows all the time. Like there's a point in time when home runs are what you're looking for, and there's points in times for most of us where there's not. Most of us are like, we're going to grind a little bit to kind of earn enough money through smaller wins to take a couple of big swings, right?
Yeah.
And we're looking for a variant. That you're living in the world of looking for variance. So I would love to hear you talk about the mathematical side of variance, because I think we know kind of what it is. You're never going to get a perfect 36 or a perfect 360 or a perfect 3600 ever. You're going to
Sure.
have these weird trends, these weird kind of I call them number clusters, right? That goes on there, and that's kind of what you're playing for. So mathematically speaking, talk to me and educate me and everybody else about how variance works in mathematics, and then we can talk about applying it to bets.
So the first thing you start out with is you need to have an understanding of the expectation or the expected value or the mean or the average outcome. Those are all synonyms for the same thing. And variance is defined as a deviation from that. So every bet that you make, every act that you take, every number collection, whatever you're trying to do, whether this is a single bet or a strategy for a shooter or a strategy for a day, you can calculate these things however you want. All of those have an expected outcome, the average outcome, right? And so if you think about a
Mhm.
single bet for a single roll or a single resolution, that's where the house edge comes from, right? The house edge is the amount below the expected value of the bet that you actually get paid. It's like a
Right.
little toll that the house charges to allow you to play the game, right? But one of the things I think is very strange about this and makes it hard for most people to conceptualize is when you think about the expected value. Let's just take a $30 place bet on the six. Okay. The average outcome, what you would do to calculate this thing is you would say, okay, well, there's 36 possible rolls of the next roll. There's 36 ways the dice can land. Write all 36 of those down and then make a column that says if it's 1-1, then what happens? If it's 1-2, then what happens? If it's 2-1, and go all the way down. And then you just take the average of all those numbers. What's weird I think one of the things that is a mental block for a lot of people, and the reason they don't understand or think about things in terms of expected values, is the expected value on a $30 place six is something that you never receive. You either lose $30 when a seven comes, you get no dollars when everything but a seven or a six comes, or you receive 35. None of those three numbers is the average of all of the outcomes. And so the average
Mhm.
value is, $32 or what. I mean, we could plug it in a spreadsheet. I don't know
Sure.
what it is off the top of my head, but, and because you never actually see the average, it's something that I think people get a block from. Variance is a measure, one way that we can measure how much different than the expected value the outcomes can be. And so the way it gets measured actually is you take the expected value of the squared deviations from the mean. So that's a really gobbledygook way to
Yeah.
say the more spread out the distribution is, the higher the variance, right? When you take about, if you want to visualize it, you publish your roll histogram that has all the twos, threes, fours, fives, and all of a sudden it looks like a little bell
Mhm.
curve since you've got so many of
Yep.
them now, right?
Yep.
Well, the wider that curve is, the higher the variance. That's one way to think about it. And so if you have on a one roll basis, the very left part of that distribution is gonna say negative $30 because that's the worst outcome on a single $30 place bet, right? The farthest point to the right on this picture will say $35 because that's the best outcome you can get. You roll a six. And then there'll be a bunch of zeros sort of, in the middle or close to the middle. Well, if you said, okay, now do it for two rolls, pretend you're always working, right?
Mhm.
Well, you might win twice, you might lose twice, you might win once, you might get zero twice. All of a sudden, you start to fill out this
Yep.
distribution.
Yep.
And that's why you can do a distribution, whether it's for a single bet or a full strategy or for a full day. Like I could chart. I don't do this, but I could chart my daily wins and losses and create a distribution. That distribution is going to have a tremendous amount of variance because the wins are very big, the losses are very big, and there's all sorts of outcomes in the middle. And so variance is a way that we measure how spread out that distribution is. So one of the things to use another example that sort of illustrates one of the reasons I don't like some types of strategies personally is a lot of people. So take the distribution of martingale and you say define it as I'm going to go either until I until I win or until I bust, right? I've got enough in
Right.
my bankroll to do, let's say, 9 steps or 10 steps or whatever it is. Well, 99 point some odd percent of the time, I'm going to win $10 or whatever the base bet is, right? And so most of my distribution says $10. The only other outcome is a very, very small percentage of the time, draw a line about half a mile to the left and put minus 12,000 or whatever it is, right?
Right.
Whatever your bankroll is when you go bust. The variance of that strategy is enormous. It never feels like it to the average person because so I said this once on your podcast, if you squint enough, your brain kind of forgets that really nasty event in the far left tail, right?
Right.
You
Right.
can't see it.
Yeah.
Slightly
Right.
more slightly more tangible way to say that is that many people will play for a long time in a martingale system and never experience it, and that tricks our brains into believing that the variance doesn't exist. It feels like almost like I'm just guaranteed to win $10 every iteration.
Sure.
And you're close to guaranteed, but not actually guaranteed. And in fact, the variance of a martingale is enormous, even though most of the time it's just $10, $10, $10, $10. And it
Right.
becomes the basis for these sort of paycheck level things, or gamble for a living type of strategies. And I'm like, actually, it's one of the worst ways you can do that, because if you wanted to lower your variance, that would be one way I wouldn't suggest you do it, because the variance of that actual outcome is really large, because that distribution is very wide. It goes all the way from negative 12,000 to positive 10 or whatever it is.
Right. That's interesting. So the way that you framed that earlier is kind of cool. Like, what can happen on the one roll? Of course, lose 30, win 35, and then it's lose 70, win what, or lose 60, win 70. And as you add more bets to it, right, that kind of thins that out a little bit, but it does also increase that left side, right? You have more
So
opportunities
exactly.
to win a little bit and one chance to lose it all.
Yeah, do 135 across
that.
or whatever, 160 across or whatever. Now all of a sudden you can lose 160. You can still get zeros when you throw craps and horn numbers and things like that. You can get $49 if you roll a 2 or a 4 or a 10. You can get 35 on the 5, 9, 6, and 8.
Right.
Absolutely. The variance of on a one roll basis for that strategy is going to be larger, because the upside on for one roll scoots a little bit to the right. You can now win 49 as opposed to only being able to win 35 before, or on the very, very far left, now you can lose 160 or whatever we said to start with. And so, yeah, the average outcome is still going to be pretty close. I'd have to think, I don't have these things memorized, but the average outcome wouldn't be all that different from one single place bet, because you've replaced a big loss with a bunch of smaller wins, and on average, those things will, roughly speaking, cancel each other out. And so your expectation for one roll is very similar, right? It's about on one roll, it's about, let's just say, about 1%. You're expected to lose about $1 or so, $1.50 or so for one roll. And so that's not going to feel like it moved that much, but the variance is going to start spreading out. And so now imagine your job or your strategy is, I'm just going to do 10 shooters of 160 across. And now calculate, now you go, let 10 shooters go. They might all 0.7 out. They might all roll for 1,000,000 years, whatever it is.
Right.
Plot the outcomes of all of those. Now the numbers get enormous in both directions. And so the game of craps, I think, one of the things I think is the most fascinating thing about this game is watching people who are, we talked about risk aversion, people who are risk averse. So in the parlance of economics, finance, statistics, I would use things like risk and variance more or less interchangeably. So someone who is risk averse would prefer to avoid variance. That's a perfectly natural thing that almost everybody, that's how most people live their lives, right?
Yep.
You need to get compensated in some way in order to take risk. Gambling is the only place in the world where we are not only not compensated to take risk, we are charged to do it. And so, and that's just how it works. And there's nothing wrong with it. As long as you get entertainment value or some other, you get enjoyment, hopefully, you should get something out of it, because you're not, on average, going to get money out of it. You're not being compensated to take this risk. You should get some enjoyment out of it, right? But I love the idea of watching people who are risk averse try and navigate a game by avoiding the risk. But when you avoid the risk completely, you're toast. And let me illustrate that as follows.
Yeah, let's hear that.
You can devise, it's probably a little easier to think about this. I'll use a roulette as an example, but this still applies to craps. It just makes the math a little bit simpler to visualize. Okay. So if you said, I would like to, I hate variance. I don't like risk. I would like to mitigate my risk. I say, I have a roulette strategy that has no risk. No risk, in the most strict sense of the definition, means that the outcome is identical no matter what happens. The only way to achieve that in roulette is to place, for example, $1 on all 38 spaces. If you place $1 on all 38 spaces, no matter what happens, the dealer will swoop away 37 of them, stack up 35, and hand you 36 of them back. every single outcome is identical. You can
Mhm.
lock in $2 lost every time. That, first of all, is one way to think about the house edge in some sense, is that
Sure.
they get to scrape the $2. Like, they've
Yep.
neutralized all possible outcomes. But more than that, that is the way you can illustrate approaching a game of chance, a gambling game, with no risk. It is not coincidence that in this case, when you lock in an outcome, you lose money. There are no games in the casino where you can lock in a guaranteed outcome where you don't lose. There are
Right.
things that make it look like that, right? You can wait for a don't pass or a don't come bet to get set and then place the other side of it and then lock in a guaranteed win after the fact.
Right.
But that doesn't count. You're only locking it in after you risked losing it in the first place, right? There are
Right.
ways to lower your risk as the game goes on. You can lower the volatility of outcomes. You can reduce the ups and the downs as the game progresses sometimes, but that's not the same thing as mitigating your risk completely. And so I feel like so much of people, the way they do their bankroll management, the way they devise strategies, is them sort of unknowingly grappling with this idea of internally, intuitively, they don't like risk.
Hmm.
And so they're trying to avoid it. And it's impossible to win at a game where, like craps or roulette or anything with a negative expectation, unless you take on at least some risk, because the only way to have no risk is to lock in a loss. That's what negative expectation means, right? If I
Right.
collapse all of the
Yeah.
possible outcomes into one, I lose. So if I'm going to win today, if I'm going to win on this roll or this shooter or this 10 shooter bankroll, or today or this week or this month, if I'm going to come out ahead, I have to take risk and fall on the lucky side of variance. There is no other way to do it, right? There are ways
Yep.
to do things like play poker, or there are other games that involve chance that you can, if you have a sufficient skill set. Even advantage blackjack play is one of these things where, yes, you still have variance, you still have outcomes that flow. The cards are not known, but you
Sure.
can get the edge in your favor. But craps, roulette, these other games, you can't do that. And so that's why, I mean, that's my sort of, I wouldn't call it succinct, but that's my
Yeah. No,
like
it's
summation of how variance interplays with all of
well,
this.
it's well stated, and I've said this a million times. The game is not beatable, right? If people think that there's no way to beat the game. You're always going to incur. You have to incur risk, otherwise you can't win. The question about being risk averse, though, is how much. And I guess the thing with strategy building is what I've seen a lot of people do is make strategies that are trying to avoid risk, but they're riskier to get there, right?
Yeah.
Because in this quest to sort of eliminate the bad things from happening, you end up making potential worse situations for yourself. And
So
being
yeah,
risk
we talk.
averse actually, can be worse.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about this once before, where one of the things that ends up happening to the average person is they approach what they view as the risk is not the expected value of the loss, but the probability of losing.
Mm-hmm.
And so they, to them, something that is very unlikely to lose at all feels like less risk. And I try and preach this in all directions, your direction and everybody else's, that you should look at all of these outcomes as probability weighted. Losing $300 on what is the example we came up with? We came up with an example last time.
There was
Like,
a yeah, $300 on the don't versus a $600 lay something
yeah, I
on
mean,
the floor or something.
you
Yeah.
can move. Maybe it would be instructive one day if I come on the show where we can show pictures and computer screens and stuff. Maybe I'll
Hmm.
just show you the variant. I don't know these numbers off the top of my head, but
Sure.
like show you the actual variance calculated for when you just have a $300 don't versus laying the four for 600 or whatever it is, right? I mean,
Sure.
people, they move these things around. Um,
Right.
I think people would be surprised. To me, if you lose $600 half the time, that you do the 300, those are the same thing to me. And I'm so
Mhm.
deep in this way of thinking that I genuinely don't understand why most people don't look at it that way. That just
Right.
seems natural to
Well,
me, even
the
though I
reason
understand most
I
people
think
won't.
the reason why is, and I think I said this to you last time too, and maybe we can dive into this because the variance in terms of financial variance we've talked about, the variance in terms of outcome or the dice variance is, I think, what we're banking on, right? Yeah, it's less. You're right. Over the course of 1,000 trials, 1,000 outcomes, you're going to have X number of times where you lose the don't pass on a come out 7, whatever that number is, 60, whatever it is times, and half as much you'll lose the 300 the $600 on the 4, right?
Yep,
Over the course of all this long time.
exactly.
And we know that's going to happen. That's what you're saying. You don't care because you know that over the course of time you're going to lose one twice as much as the other, but the dollars, the dollars do matter because in a lay situation you're paying vig, so you're actually paying money
Sure.
to lose, right?
It is a little worse,
It's a little
a
bit worse to
fraction
do
worse
that.
to do it that way. Sure.
Yep. Now, the theory is, and this is again the dice probability theory. People say, well, in the short term, in this variant that we're in right now, this 36 or 50 roll variant that I'm at the table for, perhaps this time is the day where the 9s aren't coming, or the 6s aren't coming, or the 4s aren't coming, or the
Sure.
7s aren't coming on the come out. So I'm incurring extra risk because of probability, and I'm playing for this. Hopefully, I'm in a variant where I'm beyond probability. Right. So there's this outcome variance too that I think that comes into play. You can call it fallacy if you want to, right?
Well,
Today the
I
9s are
just,
running hot or whatever, right?
well,
Or
and that's
the
fine.
trending analysis. So
I mean, I guess maybe one way to speak the language that you are using for people that think that way is, if you want today to be the day that you are afraid of the 9, or want to lay the 9 because they're never showing up, then fine. I mean,
mhm,
fine, pick whichever one you want. Just maybe quit acting like it's special or different, because
right.
if you have your own individual reason for doing, I mean, look, like I said, outside, let's throw the vig away, although it matters. Let just,
Mm,
if today's the day that you want to lay the 4 instead of having the don't pass, I mean, okay, fine. I mean, they're all the same as far as I'm concerned, right? Like in terms of how often your probability weighted
mhm.
loss. I mean, so be it. I guess. I think. I guess I don't know when it clicked for me differently, because I'm sure at some point I kind of thought. And look, I feel the session, I still feel when I go play, I feel the session, like I define things that happened today. Today was good, today was bad. Today I couldn't roll any. There was almost no 5s today. I feel all
Mhm.
of the same things that everybody else feels. It's just
Sure.
that I don't understand why these are all arbitrary endpoints. We could draw one. Why don't we draw an endpoint every 10 minutes or
Well, they
every day
are.
and a
Well,
half?
remember we had the guy that did the quantum, or not the quantum. He did the chi-square chart over 15 rolls, right, to try and in the moment what's happening, right?
Sure.
Um, and I think and here's again same topic. It's which is like today I threw, my last 15 shots, 6 of them were 5s, completely out of the realm of normalcy, right?
Sure.
Do you bet the 5? Like, is the 5 more likely to come because today it seems that way? Like, there's going to be days where you're in that crazy variant that the 5 is the thing today, right? Do you, like, psychologically or dopamine, whatever you want to call it, do you make the switch and go, "Oh God, here we are. This is the day to
No.
make the money on the 5," or do you go, "Nope, I know that every dice roll is independent and math is math, and over time it works out." Like, how do you
The
view that moment? Because a lot of us are like, "Here it is. This is the
those
time."
Yeah, it's not that I don't observe it. It's not that I don't feel it. I have, I think, four, maybe 5 times in my entire life done a hot bet. Every single one
Mm,
of them was after hitting half the bonus. I hopped the 6-1 because I don't actually think that it actually does show up more often than it should or whatever. But there was one day where it happened where we hit like I don't bet the small and I only bet the all. And so like I hit half of it and then 6-1 out the next roll, like maybe 2 or 3 times in a day. And I just started being annoyed by it. And so I said, screw it. Like this way, like if I'm either going to be annoyed because this
Right.
way, if I'm annoyed because it happened again, at least I make $1,500, or I put $100 on the 6-1 for one roll or whatever. I think I won it once out of 5 times, which I guess is better than I should or whatever. So,
Sure.
but so I see and feel those things, but they're not real. Like the thing that you can never, and this is a thing that I've argued with people electronically and in person to absolutely no end. I understand why you feel like a thing is happening, but this is exactly why they put I think they should advertise the rolls on screens for craps just like they do in roulette,
Mm-hmm.
because it makes people come out of the woodwork, and the
Yeah.
casino knows that it's every dollar on the table is good for me. Whatever can induce action I want to have happen. People look at the stupid wheel. Look, sometimes I play my free bet tickets or whatever, and I'll just walk in. If the craps table isn't open, the roulette table is. I'll just say, and I know the dealers. I say, just pick red or black. I don't care. I said, you just pick, right? And they
Right.
will look at the screen before picking red or black, and I'm like, what are you doing? Like, of all the people
That's
in the
funny.
world to be immune to this, but no, so
Yeah.
few people are. We're sort of pattern recognition has helped humanity evolve, right? We're sort of
Mm-hmm.
alive and thriving in part because
But
we're good at
patterns
recognizing patterns.
patterns
But
do happen, right? Patterns
of course they
clearly
do.
happen, right?
There's a
And
difference
it's that
between
is the detection though, right? The detecting the pattern and like living in it
yes,
versus looking back at it, right?
you can detect a pattern that has already happened in craps every time.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
You
of course, of
cannot
course. Hindsight.
detect a pattern that is about to happen ever. Of course, if you guess enough times, of course you're going to be right some of those times.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you're going to feel like fives are coming and bet the 5 and be right. It's just
Right.
going to turn out to be exactly as often as you should be when you look at all of them. And that's a thing that you can't ever. I would be willing and happy to. I would love to have people who believe they can sense that happening or feel that they're in the middle of a hot number or whatever it is. My only request is that if we're playing together, you tell me what it is, and we'll keep track of all the rolls, and
Right.
we'll just flag them
Right.
all. But you can't guess 3 times, because if you guess 3 times and are right 2 out of 3, that didn't mean anything. You got to guess a bunch of times, and I just believe very strongly that it's going to turn out that you're right exactly as often as it was going to be as if you didn't have any idea what was going on. And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't know how to shake somebody. There are plenty of people, some of which are active commenters as well, who just refuse to acknowledge that. They just say, no, I know we're in this, or I can tell, or I can strategize against it. And at some point I'm arguing pseudoscience, and
Right.
I don't know what to do. If
Well,
somebody could.
isn't this the point of pressing? And this is the pressing for the moon or pressing for whatever mentality is. And I think there's two schools of thought on it. Not so much the aggressiveness level, but where do you press? Right? You win $35. Let's say I got 110 inside. I would hit the 6 for
Yep.
$35. Right? Is it better to press the 6 and make it look like 60? Right? The number that hit more likely to hit again because we're in a thing. Right? That's what I do. Typically, I'll press the one
Sure.
that hit because it seems
Me
like
too.
that makes the most sense. Some people will press the sister and say, well,
Yep.
these two are kind of married somehow. So the way the dice are configured, the sister, if you're in a zone for the 6, you're in a zone for the 8 too. Get them both. Other people say, I got no idea what's going to happen. This guy's throwing box numbers. We're going to go 22 inside and press them all a little tiny bit. Right? What is, mathematically speaking, the right way to do it? Or is the right way to do it just to say, don't do any of that, just take your money because you took the risk, and on your
Yeah.
variance, your financial variance matrix, you beat it, right? You took risk and you
Sure.
actually scored. Like, celebrate the win and get the $35 off the table.
Yeah.
As a
The math.
mathematician,
The
and as
mathematical
and
answer
as
is
and
to
as JB, there's
the
two answers there. I
mathematical
know.
answer is, if you happen to win a bet, then you should take them all down and never come back again.
Mm-hmm.
You should never put a
Yeah,
dollar on the
right.
table. That's the math. I
Right.
mean, that's the real
Right.
answer, right?
Sure,
Because
sure.
like you're not going to get all of those dollars back, right? And on average, right?
Right.
It doesn't make any difference. You could press the 6 or the 8. I suppose on a very tiny micro fraction of an EV difference between, like, the house edge on the 5 is a little higher than the 6. So pressing the 5 is slightly worse in that very small sense. But in
Hmm.
terms of how likely it is to show up, it's all irrelevant. I press the numbers that hit only because it is 100% because it is less confusing for the dealer to deal with. If there was a way to like pre-program it or something, I might set a different pre-program just to press more numbers a little bit more for, but like I don't want to deal with odd numbers and rounding and weird stuff or make the dealer's life hard. So it just
Right.
goes 300 goes to 600. The next time I press it goes to 1200. The next time I press is 18. The next time I press is 3000. That's how it is. It has nothing to do with me going the 6 must be hot. There are plenty of times when I think the most egregious I've ever had, I've had like 300 on the 6 and like 6,000 on the 8. Like that's
Mhm.
wild. Like what are the odds that I hit that many 8s with no 6s? Of course that
Right.
happens. But the next day I didn't like only press the 8 or something. I mean, these things just they don't matter. I don't know. I guess
But
it's
that's
this like,
but that's the point though, right? That's the interesting thing. That situation happens where on a given day, it's only the 8 for whatever reason,
yes,
right? And if you were to plot this out on a graph, you got this crazy weird thing that's going on
yeah,
today, and then you won't see an 8 for a month. So
yeah,
over the course of a month, the 8s are correct. But in the moment when it's happening, that's kind of where I'm the guy that you're talking to. I can't get my brain out of the space that says if it's happening, right? I would say every streak starts with 2, right? 2 things in a row. Now we can
sure.
start betting on that thing to keep happening. If it does stay in that streak, then you caught it. If it doesn't, big deal. But I can't look backwards at it. I can only look ahead. I'm not predicting the future, but I'm saying, well, if it's happened twice, let's just paddle with the wave. Like I used to surf when I was a kid, right? It's paddle, paddle, paddle. If I catch it, I catch it. If I don't, I don't, kind of thing.
That's
But
fine, and I think that's
I don't
fine.
want to look back and go, that was a big one back there. I don't want to do that either, right?
There's a difference between saying if this happens, I will make my decision differently and hope that I am on a wave.
Mm-hmm.
And saying that's one thing, and there's nothing incorrect about that sentence.
Is there
There's
a
nothing
mathematical problem with that? It's like, because that's exactly how I bet the line. When I
the
bet the
math.
don't pass, that's exactly how I progress my bets. Because I feel like I'm always about to have 4 in a row, 5 in a row, 6 in a row. And if I catch it, cool, then I can get out of there quick. If I happen to catch one, right?
Yes, the problem, the math, the technical answer to your question is the mathematical problem with changing your decision making based on past events is that dice rolls are a Markov process. A Markov process is something where the future is independent of the past,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it has nothing to do the path that you took to get where we are says nothing, literally nothing about what is about to happen,
Right.
right? And so that doesn't mean that it's not quote unquote more wrong to say I'm going to hope I'm in one of these
Right.
situations, as long as you know that it is no more likely that you're in one of
Right.
those than it would have been if you didn't wait for the wave to start.
Exactly.
As long
Yeah.
as you know that, it's fine.
But here's the thing, man. So that's me. That's
It's just
exactly
still
how I feel about it. Right? I know there's no, I'll use one regret. There's no causality to the third 7 in a row or the third don't pass winner
correct.
in a row. There's no
Correct.
reason for that. Okay. However, it did happen. And
Yes.
I know from watching the numbers and watching graphs as much as I do, you see 6 in a row, 8 in a row, 3 in a row
Absolutely.
the other way. You see these big streaks. And like roulette with the red black thing, those things, they're undeniably, they happen. It
Absolutely, they
doesn't
do.
mean that it's going to happen again, but after the third or the second red, I'm like, start betting red for a little bit. And if we happen to catch one of those, fantastic. And again, I know
Okay.
it's
Here.
my
Okay. Let me
brain
let me do it this
tricking
way.
me.
No,
I'm
it's
being
fine.
fooled by this, right?
Yes, you are, and that's okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. You and everybody. That's why they build.
Right.
That's how the buildings get built. Is
I
everybody
know it. I know
tricking
it.
themselves into thinking that they're better off? What?
Yeah.
Here's there's. Let me put it this way. There's nothing special. Again, we'll just use roulette because it's kind of easier to visualize without
Sure.
getting
Sure.
into more complications. And let's just say red and black. What you're not observing is what about the times when the pattern goes red, black, red, red, black, red, black? That happens
Right.
all the times too. How do
Sure.
you know you're not in one of those? And if we define all of the possible patterns that exist, and there are an infinite number of them, you're always going to be able to see one that you're in. but it has nothing to do with the next iteration.
Right.
And it's just that you want to ride a red wave or a black wave because those are, or an even number wave or whatever it is, because those are
Sure.
relatively easy for us to see a process quickly.
Totally. Yep.
But why wouldn't you just go, well, I see it goes back and forth. It goes red, black, red, black. Well, I better hop onto that train and just start flopping my bet back and forth too. Maybe I'm in one of those. You could define that however you want. The point is, as long as you know that if that's just how you get the entertainment, or you're like, look, I have no idea what I want to bet, so I'm just going to wait and look and go, well, there's been a lot of reds. To me, red and black are the same. Why don't I just go with the one that's been showing up? Fine. I can make the same argument for, like, look, there's been 3 reds in a row. Maybe black is due. That's no more correct.
Well, that's the question. You just moved me to the thing, right? What's due?
I'm doing that on purpose.
Yeah, I know. Is anything ever due? Like, that's
Of course not.
Like, because red happened doesn't mean red's going to happen again. Because 5s are rolling or whatever doesn't mean it's good, unless you get into the whole dice control argument. But that doesn't mean that's going to happen later. I think I'm more of a person. I think maybe it's a mental thing for me, and I think a lot of people feel this way too, which is I would like to believe, fool myself if you want to call it that way, that the positive thing is going to be the thing, right? Where some people would say, and it's the same risk. Like if it's $10 every time on the same thing that's happening, no different than me betting red every single roll. Right? Your brain wants to feel like you made the right decision versus just plugging your money out there. And like I could give the dealer $100 and say, bet red for the next 15 rolls, and I'm going to go take a piss and come back and tell me if I won or not, right? That's no fun at all.
Exactly.
So I think your brain gets in like, hey, not that I want to change anything, but like I want to navigate, like you said, navigate it early. Exactly. It's totally, I know it's an illusion. And my risk aversion to that is, it's always a unit of risk, right? And if I happen to catch a wave, I will increase the bets as I go in the wave and try and make the wave a little more strong. And, your risk, my risk tolerance there is still, my actual risk is still 1 unit. If I play it that way, right? I mean,
so kind of.
Ultimately,
I agree. I see why you say that.
And I'm down with that, right? So but I know I'm fooling myself. I know that I teach this every day. I'm like, guys, trends are real. This shit happens, and I've done it. Here's 7 don't passes in a row, or here's 7 don't pass losers in a row. I had 9 the other day. 9 pass line winners in a row the other day.
I've seen 15.
That's a hell of a streak, right? And you're like, if you see that and you're like the 3rd one in, and I'm like, and I've said it, like, guys, we should switch over. Like I'm feeling that it's happening, but I know that, 2 begets 3, 3 begets 4. And sometimes you found a pattern and you just don't know it yet. And it may be fallacy. So is it due to happen? Probably not.
No. And if we had 1,000 instances of that feeling, a very small number of them would turn out to be enormous streaks. Of course they would.
Yeah.
Exactly the right amount, as whether we had a completely separate set of roles where you didn't participate and have any feelings at all. And we go, look, here's how many there are now. Right. I mean, this, look, I played the other day, maybe a week ago or so. And it was actually really good for quite a bit. I wasn't, and I don't do this too much, but I was kind of like just keeping track of, like, I'm collecting data for another reason, but I kept track of not the individual roles, because it's just me sitting there. I'm not writing things down. Just how long my roll links were between 7 outs, right? And I'm just like keeping a little bit of data on that. And I had like a 32 and a 24 and a 15, like all back to back, which is wild. I mean, it was wild. It was amazing. But at no point did I sort of feel like, okay, like it's good. Like I've got a good rhythm, or I'm going to on a roll, or I'm more likely to do better on the 4th roll or the 5th roll. I didn't feel any of those things. I don't believe in them. Right. I also didn't believe, like, oh man, I've had 3 or 4 good ones in a row, I'm due for a bad one. Like that. I don't believe that. About half the time it's going to be pretty bad, and about 1/6 of the time it's going to be the bare minimum. And like there's this survival probability data that I've showed you before. One of the things that I'm enjoying very perversely about the tournament that you guys are doing is how awful close that you guys are collectively to what it looks like the cumulative probability should be for hand links. It's all yeah, sometimes you're going to find three in a row, or
Yep.
sometimes you're going to have 5.7s out in a row, and you're going to feel like, well, we're due for a good one. None of those things is true. I think the thing that fools people is so people that think like a little more than the base level, or someone who doesn't care about the math at all. They think I know that on average, this is what the distribution is supposed to look like. And what they feel like is every time there's a little deviation from that, there's supposed to be this like inertia bringing things back into balance. And that's not how it works.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? So I got a quote for here from somebody. The inertia. What a great word to describe this process, right? It's like you're rolling, and let's say you're on a 15 roller,
Sure.
right? You rolled 15, and bring in the inertia into that. Your thought process could be, hey, we're going to keep on going. I got 15 in me. I got 15 more. There's no
Sure.
reason to stop, right? The other person says, 15, you've exceeded expectations by over 2.5 times what you should
Yeah.
have seen. That
Right.
seven's coming. I've heard a lot. I've said it on my shows. People say it all the time. It's coming. It's due. You've gone past the expectation. I've heard people say, now that you're past 8, you're getting closer to the 7. And how do you respond to that? Because I think I have my own thoughts on that. But what do you think
It
about that?
depends on who I'm talking to. If I'm talking to somebody I don't like, I would say it's nonsense. If I'm talking to somebody I'm trying to educate, I'd be a little more careful with my words. But so if we think about I mean there's a lot of ways to think about it. So something like um, if we talk about a normal craps table and we talk about hand links, so let's not worry about whether that you might throw two or three come out 11s or craps numbers or whatever. Just
Right.
50% of rolls, hands from first come out roll to final 7 out, almost exactly 50% of those make it past the 6th roll.
Mm-hmm.
That what people want to say is, okay, now that we've got past this tipping point, all of a sudden the 7 is looming or something, or it's more
Yeah.
likely to show up. That's not true. 50% of the rolls that make it that far do it again,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like the only thing that makes these not perfectly round numbers is because you're like you can hit the point and like get a free come out roll. I mean, there's all sorts of like this
Sure.
thing's more complicated in if you were to really simulate. That's why you have to do this by simulation and not closed form solutions. But
Right.
so the average roll length, starting with let's just say you're on a 15 or 20 roller, and the 15 or 20th roll makes a point, so that you're coming out again on the 21st roll. People feel like, well, it's due, so it's probably going to be only one or two more rolls. And it might be, but 50% of the time from that point forward, you're going to make it past 6 again. So you're going to get to 27 or 28, 50% of the time. The problem is that everybody remembers the short ones because it's very easy to, we're not, even if you're not tabulating, when you're at a table where you just can't seem to get past the tipping point ever, right?
Sure.
When we're at a 26 roller, nobody in the world is clocking in real time, okay, I've been keeping track of all my 26 rollers. How many 26 rollers make it to 32? Nobody's paying any attention to that thing. And so, because we're not paying attention to the data in real time, every time the 7 comes, it sort of feels like it was due. And so we choose to go, yep, there we are again. And you're not, but the problem is the number of 27 rollers is, so 27 is an awkward number. I think 27 is right about 2% of all rolls make it that long. So you're only witnessing that one out of every 50, let's say. You might go days, and something can happen only 2% of the time. You might go days and days without seeing one of those. I know I've gone
Mm-hmm.
days without getting into the 20s and 30s before. And so how are you
So
able?
then you must be due for another one, right? Isn't that the
Yeah.
case?
Yeah. Trust me. I wish that we could
I know.
look, that is why martingales are they succumb to this fallacy. You think you start calculating the odds, like Here's the difference. If somebody said, before I start, what are the odds that I roll 27 times? You're like, wow, that's really low. It's like 2% of the time. But if you said, what are the odds I get to 27, get them, then I've already got to 25? You're like, oh, like about 90% of the time I'm going to get to, something like that. Right.
Right.
And people don't understand. It's just a block for people who do. I mean, it's not a natural thing to think about. So I'm not trying to talk down to people who don't understand it. It's just not something we naturally think about.
Rewind for a minute with me, because you said something and then I think you said something different. I want to make sure I understand it better. So
sure.
Some percentage of the rolls get to 6. If 6 is the stated average, right?
Yeah,
you say 50%.
Past 6, the sixth roll is about 50% of all hands.
Okay, so 50% of after that also achieve 6, or is it 50% get 50%? So 6 begets 9, 9 begets 11.5. Is that how you do that, or is it at roll 7, 50% of the time I get 13, and 50% of the time I end up with 9? Is that how that works out? Is that what you're explaining, or no? Am I missing that?
So let me try. Yeah, no, I probably said that kind of confusing. So let me try and clarify. All of this is more complicated than what I'm about to say in reality. So sure. I'm taking a little bit of liberty to start with. So I want to say that for completeness. Let's make it, one of the things that complicates it is the multiple come out rolls sequence that can happen. So let's just say, because you can start a roll and throw 11 consecutive craps and 7s, and sure. You could have a monster roll that never touches a number right before you even set a point. Right. Let's say that the 6th roll makes your point, so that your 7th roll starts a new come out sequence
every time. Let's pretend. I'm with you.
That you're like 50% likely to get to that 6th roll every time. Mm-hmm. So if you've made 6, half of those make it to 12. Half of those 12s make it to 18. Half of those 18s make it to 24.
And the other half goes halfway. Is that what you're saying? So if you're at 6, half
the other half
12,
goes somewhere between 2 and 6 more.
Is there some given math in there too? Like half of them get to 9, or is it just more of a?
So 77% of rolls that start with a come out roll make it past the 3rd roll. So if your 6th roll completes a point sequence, then about 77% of those would make it to at least the 9th roll. Not exactly 9, at least 9.
Okay.
And part of that is because part of that number is very high because, well, first of all, you can't, if you're coming out on the 7th roll, you can't lose on the 7th, right? Your hand can't be over. So you're getting to 8 no matter what. 100% of them make it to 8 or whatever, right? And so, make it past the 1st roll. Not 89% make it past the 2nd roll. 77% make it past the 3rd roll, and so on. These are called. You can look up the survival probability. I think Shackelford has the survival probabilities on his website.
Yep. Yeah, I checked that out a few weeks back. I was doing it for myself on my roll stacked. How close is my outcomes to what we expect on terms of like the number of rolls that were 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, whatever.
Sure.
To see how close I actually was to that. Because it's funny, I'm so close. What's weird about my roll set is that I'm so close to random on every metric you can think of, with the exception of the money. And I don't know if you caught the shows I did this week, but it's fascinating.
I'll watch all your stuff.
I mean, I'm looking at my pyramid. It looks almost identical. It's within a few percentage points here and there. Things are where they ought to be. But when I run strategies against those rolls and against random rolls, RNG rolls, or have somebody who sent me, 50,000 rolls that were logged off of a table that he actually wrote all of them down. When I run the same strategies, it's the amount of, like, the thickness of the even though I'm getting 6, they're 6 box numbers most of the time. The horns are coming on the come out. You know what I mean? So like the financials of those rolls are pretty cool. And I'm like, I can live with being random distribution and random roll length if the thickness of them is better. And again, we're not to any significance yet with numbers. I'm only
so
not 4,000 rolls.
Not to pick it apart.
No, please do, because I find it interesting, although not decision making yet.
There's a time to pick it apart. This is not that time. What I would say is, as you log your practice rolls, and I've watched, I know it's kind of weird like to watch them. I watch all
I
of
don't know
them.
how
Like I
you can
just said,
watch those things.
I don't
I
know,
can't
man.
even watch them.
I like enjoy. I'm like half rooting for you and half like smugly going, "Told you so." Like I'm kind of doing
Yeah.
both of these things, right? And so
Yeah, I know.
I get some enjoy. It's like I mean, it's no different than watching, a sport or something. I'm like watching the scoreboard a little bit, like in update in real
Well,
time and seeing it go up
in
and
all
down. And
honesty, when I'm throwing that, I'm going, I hope JB wasn't watching that one.
yeah,
There's a couple
here's
times where
all
I'm
I'll
like,
say.
oh man, he's gonna kill me on that.
It the level of variance that exists in the game is so much higher than people can intuitively understand, or even after you think about it, it's just a big number. If you are, I am not trying to take any credit away from you. I am not disputing the fact that if
It's
you
all
put
good.
your rolls into win craps and put a strategy up, you tend to win more money than random. I believe all of those things. I don't
Mhm.
dispute any of it.
Sure.
If you're not changing what you do on every roll, the fact that you happen to be rolling a bunch of horn numbers and things, you're filling your horn distribution out on the come out and the sevens on the come out or not or whatever. That is absolutely a chance. That's just chance. And if you were telling me, well, I do this on the come out and then I change it up and do something else
Hmm.
and I'm seeing results, that would be more definitive to me.
Yep.
Right? I don't dispute that you're whatever the numbers you run, I believe them
Yeah.
implicitly. I don't have any dispute on anything that you've done. It's but it's just another. There's a million ways. So here's a slightly more statistical sort of nuanced thing to say. So when we look at all of these um, different outcomes, when you're finished or along the way statistics has a very difficult time saying anything with absolute certainty, right? We would say things can happen with 99.999% probability and so on and so forth. It's just very difficult to ever say absolute certainty. Like it's the world sort of doesn't evolve that way, right? And so what we will do is run statistical tests. The chi-square test that the guy did that he showed you that one time is an example of this, right? Where we just say it allows us to speak in the following terms. Would say, look, I don't know, but according to the data, there's like a 3% chance that this is a random outcome, right? That's the kind of thing. That doesn't mean it's zero. It just means it's
Right.
three. And the smaller that number gets, the more likely we are to conclude, okay, that's good enough for me, right? I'll never know for certain, but if it's 0.001%, even I'm going to say, you know what, buddy, I believe you. You're doing it. Like that, you will convince me, and that's fine. Um, the problem with asking the data a lot of questions is, let's say that we're looking for something to be 95%. Let's say that if we can conclude that it's 5% or less random, likely to be random, let's call that a success just for the sake of having a fixed
Okay.
number. When you ask the data a question, there's a 5% chance that you ask it a thing and it concludes incorrectly. Right. It actually was random, but I said it wasn't because it was above this threshold, but it's still, 5% chance.
Hmm.
When you ask the data a second question and a third question and a fourth question, and what about this and what about that, the odds of at least one of those things being random but showing up as non-random goes up, right? This is the I tried to illustrate this point before. This is why this is the same mathematics that confuses the Martingale people. The odds of winning a single Martingale sequence are very high. The odds of winning 75 straight are like 50-50 or whatever it is, right? So the odds of getting even if maybe I can put it this way. If I literally did equals rand between in Excel and we all just agreed there was absolutely perfect random generation or whatever, I could still test that data set. And if I asked it enough individual questions, well, what about third roll eights? And what about come out
Hmm.
threes? And what about, I'm going to get about 5% of the questions that I ask to show up as, aha, I found some proof, even though we would
Sure.
agree beforehand that it wasn't proof. So
Right. And that
that's
comes
why
down
those
to
numbers need to
like,
be very small so that we feel
right.
more comfortable about it.
Well, and I think they got to be repeatable. Repeatable. I think they got to be, like you're saying, ask the right questions of the data. We have to make sure we're not just randomly picking shit out to be like, oh, look what I did. It's got to be like legit. And I've told you before, like there's questions I can ask of what I've done that put me into, yes, it's random, right? Yes, this distribution is perfectly random. The roll lengths are perfectly random. Everything is locked into what you would expect, right? Then there's the what was I trying to do metric, and say, at pure random, could these things be done? With some level of influence, can these things be done? And that's that's those questions that I'm asking of my data, which is like you're saying, maybe I'm cooking the books to some degree.
No, you're not cooking the books.
But that's what I'm getting. That's what I'm trying to say. Can I do a thing that makes me or gives me enough ammunition to make a decision, or not? Right. Yes. And that's what I'm kind of curious about. And you're right. If I ask the wrong questions, I'm going to be in trouble.
So yeah, that's one problem. Yeah. The other problem is asking too many questions and then taking the two answers that came back the way you wanted and going, haha, see, I told you. The most compelling thing of the data that you've collected so far that I have seen has been the instances of the one faces, when a one shows up. What we still don't know, and I have thresholds above which I will say, so this is the thing that the DIs won't do that I will do as a critic of it. I have thresholds above which I'll go, no, I believe you. I think you are doing something. I can get anybody to give me a threshold in which they'll say, no, you're right, I'm not doing this. So for all the arguments that go back and forth in these philosophical camps, at least I'm willing to say at some point I will conclude you're doing something. Right now, that is the thing that is the most likely. I'm not sure yet, but I'm saying we have some evidence in favor that you might be doing something. The only problem I have right now,
the one outlier. It's the one weird outlier.
It's the biggest. It's the most meaningful outlier, and it's connected to something that you are expressly trying to do. That's important.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. The left eye being a 4 is not something that I'm considering because you're telling me you don't think you can make it be a 4. So we don't even need to look over there. You know what I mean? Like that's the kind of thing. So, but you said you might be able to make it a 1. So I'm like, awesome. It turns out so far more than you would expect, and maybe even meaningfully more. I don't know. These are tests I can't do in my head, but I can.
Sure.
It's big enough to make me go to kind of perk up a second. The only thing that I'm worried about right now is that it's the one question in 20 that is giving me a false positive. I'm not saying that's what's happening. The reason I want 10,000 and not 15 is because when you do statistical tests with 15 observations, you get so many false positives that it's not worth saying anything.
Yeah.
We'll get to 10,000. If you're still at 4 or 5% above on 10,000, it's going to, I don't know what the number, I'm going to let the math inform me. The number is likely to be less than 1% chance of it being random. And at that point, I'm like, okay, that's good enough for me.
It's kind of cool. If it works out, it's kind of cool. I don't know. Well, if nothing else, it's fun, I guess, right? To try and see if I can't make the needle move a tiny, tiny bit, you know?
I think you've learned a lot along the way, right? I mean, not just about like your own self, but like, I mean, you and I have tremendous amount of offline conversations, and at least I hope you're taking some, you're learning various things along the way. I mean, so it's not a waste of time regardless.
Oh, hell no. The journey, I was telling somebody this, I think it was Greg, actually, my friend Greg. The journey that I'm on here, he thinks I'm crazy. He's like, you're absolutely insane. What are you wasting your time for? And I get it, right? I may never move the needle. And even if I move the needle, like on small degrees, like maybe, okay, instead of the 1s, we make them 4s on top. And now we're getting, better box results, whatever. Even at that small degree of that I'm fluctuating right now, is it going to make you have an advantage? It's not advantage play. It's to me, it's a curiosity play.
It's a big hurdle to overcome, but if you can, I mean, it's not theoretically impossible to have enough control to have an advantage play, but that we're going to answer all once we have the final data set, we will, and I'll spend all the time you want to on this over
and 10,000 is about the right number, right?
There's no magic bullet. 10,000 is enough for at least me personally to believe that what we're saying is authentic and stuff. There is no exact correct number, and I will say the people that want there to be a really, really small number are making a statistical mistake that's way beyond.
There's that Bone Tracker app looks at sets of 720, which I think is not enough. That's a trend. How is your trend?
It's not nothing, but it's again, like I guess the point is if if you can do it over 720, and then you do it again over the next 720, and then again over the next 720, it becomes sort of irrefutable, I guess, at some
Sure.
point, right?
Yeah. If you save
The
those
point of
books out,
getting
then for sure. Yeah.
yeah, the point of getting as many as we can is so that we can make very strong conclusions about what we are. It will allow us, when we run our statistical tests, the things that are there's called standard errors. The standard errors, which is like a measure of how precise your estimate of what you're trying to do is, they get very small. That's all we're trying to do, is have
Mm-hmm.
very narrow confidence intervals so that you can go, no, I not only estimate that I throw a one, 38% of the time, I am very, very confident in that. And because I've got this many rolls to show it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the more rolls you have, the more confident you are in whatever you're trying to say. That's all we're doing.
Sure.
10,000 is not a literal magic number. It's not like 9,800 wouldn't do the job, or
But it's
10,400.
something, but it's getting close to significance, I think. And like I said, like I was telling Greg before, if none of this works, it doesn't matter ultimately. Like, because like the journey that I'm on, and I think hopefully people are coming with me on this thing, is like, what going in, right? I knew most of the math, I knew, all the bets, and I knew of dice control when I had to do it. And like the study that I've been on for a couple of years, deep diving into the channel and all the math and stuff, and of course our friendship, and now doing the rolls out there, it's like it's another piece of depth, I think. But more than anything else, buying a table was maybe a dumb, expensive move. But let me tell you how cathartic it is to go out there and throw dice every night, even if I'm completely wasting my time. Like Greg's like,
That's
you're
the
wasting your
thing.
time. I'm like, but I have my own craps table in the garage, and I can burn an hour and a half out there and just pretend bet. And like, if I had a shitty day and I'm throwing 100 dice, and it's just a good space to be in. It's a good
If
headspace.
it's
I think
therapeutic, if it's fun,
it's
there's a
totally
million
therapeutic.
reasons. See, that's the
Yeah,
thing. Like,
it's awesome. Yeah.
so I will never, even if I don't think you will reach the conclusions that you do, I don't think it's a waste of time for all kinds of. Who am I to say how you spend your time is a waste? That's such a to
Mm.
me that's like a very I don't appreciate that kind of worldview, because I think showing up at the casino and grinding out 25 don't 30 don't lay 30 odds is a waste of time. That doesn't mean I'm right.
Right.
We're just different people who want to do different things. So I would push back hard on that. Like, if you set your life's goal out to do this, and that if you would consider it a failure if you didn't show evidence, then that's one thing. But you're just enjoying your time, and
Mhm.
I enjoy the academic part of it. I enjoy helping you out. It's been kind of fun to get to know
Totally.
you and like exchange. Like, there's all kinds. I mean, there's all sorts of other things that don't have to do with like, this is the thing. It goes back to the very beginning, what we were talking about. What goes into your utility function is not just, do I do the thing that maximizes the amount of money that I have per unit of time. Your utility function can be maximized on so many dimensions. Stuff you enjoy, something that
Mhm.
intellectually stimulates you, something that's therapeutic for you. And if throwing dice in your garage is fun on any more dimension, then by definition you're not wasting your time. This sort of hyper focus
That's
on,
true.
like, no, you should just be grinding out your EV wherever you can, is such a boring way to go about life. We would do half the
Hmm.
things we do as human beings if that was the case, right? We'd just all be robots trying to find an extra nickel on the ground. I mean, who cares, man? Just enjoy your time. At least that's how I look
Right.
at it.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's just a refreshing way to look at it, because I am the same way. I like to grind a little bit, and I do grind a little bit, but I grind with a purpose. And I had this big ass roll a few days back. It was like whatever, 35 or something like that. And it
I
was
know. I
live,
watched that one. I watched that
and
one.
I made and I got in an argument, not an argument, it's the wrong word to use. I had a disagreement with somebody about how I played it. And I made two statements on this. One is, I played that strategy without altering the strategy. I just said,
Right.
I'm going to play it this way, and I just played it that way. Never made one decision. I just did what I was going to do, and it worked out pretty good. I think I made like $8,000 or something like that in the 35 rolls,
Yeah.
which is great. Now, at one point, at the very end of the roll, I had $3,600 on the felt, right? And it was soul crushing to some degree to lose that,
Yeah.
right? Like, oh God, and again, the seven's coming. Everybody in chat, the seven's coming, get your bets off. The seven's coming, get your bets off. Right? Pull it down, regress, get it out of there, right? Because we're all, and I'm in this group too, where if it was me in an actual casino, I probably would have pulled that money down. I'm like, okay, $3,600. That's to me, that's a mortgage payment, right? Go down to 750 across, try it again, take it off, right? But this mindset of I have so much out there, I don't want to lose what's out there, even though I didn't bring it with me.
Yeah. I mean,
Right?
that is your money. I think
It is my money.
you should
It's my
look at it
money,
that way,
but I didn't bring it with me, is what I'm
I
saying, right?
understand.
And I think
Yeah.
there's two levels of my money, and I think it's hard for me to explain this without sounding like an arrogant person or like a dumbass, either way you want to look at it. But it is my money, but I didn't bring it, right? So it's to me, it's like a tool that was given to me. And like you say about this risk aversion thing, yeah, it's money out there that's at risk, but it's not at risk, if that makes sense. It's like risk-free, whatever. You can call it whatever you want to, but pulling that down, getting out of that thing, or leaving it out there, or saying I should have picked up the 5 and 9 and rode that thing into the ceiling, I think is an interesting conversation, right? Because when you brought up the idea of grinding paycheck play, and I do grind most of the time because I don't have a ton of money. So I grind. I make my 200, my 300, my whatever I'm going to make. If I happen to make more, then I swing like I swung that day and go for a big one. And I think the home run versus the paycheck mindset is an interesting thing, because the paycheck thing, and I don't martingale, I don't ladder, but I know a lot of guys do. $500 a day, 30 or 26 days in a row, and 4 days of loss is a loss for the month.
Yep.
Right. So I was telling somebody after that session, I'm like, the reason why I didn't pull the money down, I knew my paycheck goal was $500. I had 8,000 in the rack. So I just funded however many days that is of paycheck play, if I'm doing it for real. And at some point, you're going to lose the 5,000. I'm going to go out there and burn 5K someday, right? The way that you recover an enormous loss in a paycheck situation is to have a few of these enormous wins, right? And I've said to people before, over my lifetime, I'm probably ahead. And the reason why I'm probably ahead is I've caught 5 or 6 hands like that one, where I bought it for 500 and cashed out for 6 grand or 8 grand or 10 or 12. And that has made up for all the times I lost 500 or 1,000. All those other times where I got beat, the 3 or 4 enormous wins make up for it. That's why I swing for the fences sometimes. And it's not because I'm being a degenerate, but I think the only way to compensate for paycheck style grindy play is to have a couple of home runs. And you got to hit a home run. If I didn't have the $3,600 out there, I wouldn't have cashed in 2,000 on the last 2 hits that I got. And that's how I view that. And I think you play somewhat similarly, but you come out of the gate playing that way. But
Well, I actually think so. When people, and I actually watched that live, and I think I mean, no one's going to believe me, but I think I win something like 100,000 on that roll. If that's a live hand that I'm a part of, because you hit like 3 hard 8s in a row, and after the first one, I would have had 1,000 on both of them, so that's like $18,000 right there. Like I mean, I would have been at table max on several numbers. I mean, it was a super roll with tons of inside numbers. It was just almost exactly what it would have been, maybe the 3rd or 4th best roll I've ever been a part of, maybe 2nd best roll I've ever been a part of in my whole life. But the mentality of people saying like, oh, you should bring your money down, like look, whatever. I mean, do whatever people want to do. I just don't like people. There's this smugness about people who are like, they wait and see what happens and then kind of like, yeah, I knew you should have taken it down or whatever. I don't understand it, because here's the logic, right? Most of the people who are saying that, what on some level, whether they articulate it exactly this way or not, they are saying, I think that's too much money to have out there. I'd rather not lose it, so bring it back, or bring most of it back, or whatever. Regress all or most. Fine.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you regret. Let's say you had, just for illustration, you say you had $1,000 on every number, 1,200 on the 6 and 8, just to make it easy. Sure. Okay, and then regress down to what? 500, 200. Let's say you regress all the way down to $200 or $300 on a number. Fine. The exact same argument that you would make at that point in time would be, that's too much money out there. You're not going to get all that money back. Regress. And if you kept doing that, you will arrive at the same conclusion, which is, oh my gosh, you should have never put a dime out there in the first place. That's the only way to be safe, right?
Yeah.
This idea that you can run to safety is so misinformed, right? It's born out of this, again, it's people trying to play a game that inherently involves risk and necessitates risk to win, but being terrified of actually taking risk. And if you're terrified to take risk with money that is, it's still your money, but won money, let's say you've pressed up or whatever, then obviously you're not going to want to be taking that level of risk with the actual money. And I think here's the point I would make to counter no one is arguing back with me, but I believe what they would say to me is it's different when you have 5400 across versus 54 across. And I'm like, yeah, but what about the next 100 hands where you start at 54 across? That's going to add up to you putting out $5,400 of your money across. If you're scared to do that,
Sure.
then don't do it. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's not a
Right.
bad thing. That doesn't make you a bad person or something wrong with your psyche or anything like that. But it's so silly to argue against having $5,400 across in that instance, but be perfectly content with starting at 54 across 100 times over the next month. That doesn't make any sense. Those are exactly equivalent. The only difference is one of them is happening all at once.
Sure.
Right. But that's why I'm saying don't bring 5,400 of your own. Like, if you're out there, like people were telling you to start bringing your bets down. So if I had been there playing the craps here, or like if this was a live table, I would never play with all of these people. But like, let's say we were all huddled around the table and you're having this monster roll. Before I got even halfway to my ending point, people would be losing their minds going, why are you not taking your money down? I told you that same story about the guy who was losing his mind at me after, I think that time it was like 8,000 or 9,000 or something like that. I think the most I've ever left on the table was probably like 45 or 50,000. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a gut punch, but like I also won 140,000. So I don't know, like that kind of softened the blow, like.
Sure. Well, I guess and I think I wouldn't classify them as coming off as smug. It's more about wow, you had, and again, with those big dollar amounts, it's like at some point, lock up the extra because we don't typically see those kind of amounts when you're buying in for low amounts and playing that way. You don't normally see the bets get that big. It's like, well, shit, you got to want that money. $3,000 is a lot of money. And I would say, like, there's a point in time where and I've said this before, where I feel like my rack has what my rack has in it. And if I'm okay with buying in for $1,000 and having a random profit, 100% profit, right? Part of me says, take all my shit down. I'm going home. I got $1,000.
Sure.
The other part of me says, I got $1,000. I'm going home with no matter what. The 1,000 that's out there, let's see what I can do with it. And if it happens to push from 1,000 to 6,000, and we lose it all, am I okay with that?
Well, that's
most people, I think,
and
most folks are not okay with that, and it goes back to the original point about being risk averse.
Yes.
Right. It's not technically speaking your money at risk. It's an opportunity loss, right? Or it's an opportunity. Either way you want to look at that, right? It's to me, there's if I remove my opportunity at that point, then I can't make that 6,000 look like 10 or 12, and then then you're pulling back bigger money every time, right? That's the idea there. But I looked at that roll knowing that this is going to come back to bite me with my friends, because the next day it's like, oh God, what did you do? You shoulda, coulda, woulda. And I'm like, well, I was okay.
When do they want you to pull it down? Because everybody, the smugness I was referring to is when people wait and see, like, and go after they say you should come down, if one of the next couple roll, they're like, that's the smugness. Sure. I mean, like, I told you should have brought it down.
Yeah.
But if you would have said that when you were at 300 on a number, and then you make it to 1,200 on a number and hit it, like, do you still get to take a victory lap? Like, to me, nobody should be taking victory laps, right? That's how I think about the world. But like, I'm going to ask them, like, when is it that when do you get to take your victory lap? Because, the hand is obviously going to end eventually, right? If what you're saying is that what you should have done is get to your absolute peak and then come down, yes, of course. If we all knew exactly when to come down, we'd all be trillionaires. Like, this would all be very simple, right? Like, And
Right.
so since we can't do that, like, I don't know. To me, it's like,
Like I
to me,
like
the way,
it. It's goofy. I like round numbers, and then this makes no sense, right? But I think at that time, I had like 7,500 in the rack or something like that, and I was trying to get to where, like, one more hit would have been an even 10 grand in the rack
yeah, I
in
get it.
profit. I'm like, that would have been the time to pull it down. Like, okay, I made my 10. Now I'm just like, I'm cool with that, right? Like
Yeah.
trying to get to like a goal number, or get to
Or what if you threw
whatever,
six more
you
12 or
know.
six more nines, or whatever it was? Like,
Yeah, you just don't
it would,
know. Yeah.
again, it goes back to the gambler's fallacy of, even though you're at roll number 36, you are exactly as likely to throw four more nines from that point forward as you were
Hmm.
when you started. Now, that's not a likely outcome, of course, but I'm saying,
Sure.
but now all of a sudden, if you happen to throw four more eights or nines or whatever, all of a sudden you make another 15,000. I don't know. Again,
Right.
there's no, again, the point is, if you iterate this backward and you use as your defining characteristic, I should take money off the table that is not profitable to leave on the table, then you would never put a dime out there to start with, because all of it is
Hmm.
unprofitable to put on the table. And whether you spread it out over the course of 10 years or one day is irrelevant from the standpoint of how much you can expect to collect back over time. Yes, when you go to 54 across instead of 5,400 across, you get a much more time at the casino. You can have more fun theoretically, whatever, that all of those things matter. But I, to me, it's I guess, again, I'll pay you to flip the coin, and I'll acknowledge that I'll pay you to flip the coin when
Right.
you're trying desperately to avoid flipping the coin. Then there's a solution to that problem. It's take all of your money down and do something else with your time, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a perfectly healthy thing for people to do. But it's
Hmm.
just this these all they people put themselves and twist things all over the place to try and, like, everybody wants to participate in a hot roll, but people kind of get in there, like, they also kind of want to, they are implicitly capping their ceiling. Without, see, when you think of it as how much money did I put out there to start with, and you're pressing, even if you're pressing slowly or whatever, your floor is the same, right? The super short roll, I
Right.
lose what I put out there. Point 0.7, I lose my cross bets regardless. Like, I'm capping my upside by going press, collect, half press, come all the way down. Yes, your floor is exactly identical. The worst outcome is the point 0.7, you lose everything you put out there.
Sure.
That's absolutely true. You do a little bit better in these little middling rounds, maybe. If there's like 3 hits, you're likely to do a little better than someone who's
Right.
not. But then you're getting lapped, 50 fold by the time you get to hit number 8. And yeah, that doesn't happen very often. But if it does, all of a sudden it's, that roll, like I said, that's like $100,000 roll the way I play. And that funds, again, those are the kind you dream to be at the table of, right? I
Hmm.
mean, it's I don't know. To me, if you don't get enjoyment, or if that part of the game doesn't, I guess maybe what's confusing to me, and again, I'm not saying people are wrong, but it's just confusing to me. The person who wants to be a light side better and who enjoys long rolls, or is trying to get the most out of them, but then they just refuse to actually make a lot of money. That's the part I don't get that part. This kind of, like, I have to retreat to safety at all times,
Hmm.
because all you're doing is you're giving your bankroll longevity, right? Because you're like,
Right.
I'm not going to, I'm
That's
taking
right.
some money off the table, and that's fine. But if you're that, we've talked about this before. If you're that worried about longevity, then you're betting too much to start with. There's nothing wrong with being a little bit worried, or
Hmm.
having some kind of part of your mind that's like, hey, I know I'm going to play crap. I like to play the game. Let me not go through lose money I can't afford to lose, and so on and so forth. But if you're just like losing your mind about, like, and desperately trying to just extend, and like, I want to be able to play a bunch of sessions, and this is too much money, then your starting place needs to be a little smaller, right? Whether
Yeah.
that's take instead of one, it's $15 a number instead of 25 or 50, or it's bubble
Right.
craps for 6 across, or whatever it is, right? Like that's all I would say is, like, maybe
Yeah.
maybe you need to, or just don't play aggressively, or try to, or have a strategy that doesn't care about long rolls or whatever, or play the don't, or whatever it is. Like,
Sure.
if you don't want to make a bunch of money when somebody rolls 40 times, because you can't make a ton of money and risk nothing. And I feel like that's what people are
Mm-hmm.
implicitly trying to navigate is I want to be able to make a ton of money, but also
Mm-hmm.
not put anything at risk. And I'm like,
Well,
well, that's
there's this
never.
notion of so there's a notion of like, and that's the thing. It's like this win goal kind of not even a win goal, but like if you're gonna play a 35 roller and you're gonna let's say single press whatever. Let's say you're at 160 across and you're going by a quarter every time or something like that, right? And you single unit press the whole thing. Your ceiling is like you said X. Maybe your ceiling is $4,000 on that roll, and that's okay. And if you regress down to half, let's say you get to $500 a bet, you regress them down to halfway. Again, you've lowered your ceiling, but you've locked in what your comfort level is. Like my comfort level goal lock in. I'm good, feel good about myself, and if I lose what's out there, it sucks, but it won't be the end of the world. Whereas when I played that one all the way without ever regressing once, there's a whole different thing to that, right? It's like what I brought back off that table. Um, so far exceeded the win goal that it became silly at some point. At some point, it's just
Yeah.
silliness. You know what I mean? And it's like the ceiling, raising the ceiling, I guess, their potential, the opportunity, as David at CEG would call it. It was what was interesting there, I think. So, but yeah, I did the whole thing where if you're that risk averse or whatever, you want to play this way, go to bubble craps.
Yeah. I
Your
think that's a
a dollar
positive thing.
a dollar bet at bubble craps and most of them now are $5 total action or $3 total action. Your $500 lasts you forever there, and you can go and do the thing. And because here's the other thing to explore and maybe we can do this on our next time we talk, but the notion of building or regressing. And I'm going to do some shows this week on this topic, so you can watch them. You can mull it over and you can come up with some thoughts. But starting small and building your bets up to some point, and then pulling down and stopping. Like going from 64 across to 160 across, and pulling back, it's $100 and change in profit, versus going 220 and coming right all the way down to 44, and like taking one hit and coming down, and now you're playing 44, with $30 in profit, and you don't have to worry about it. There's such an interesting risk conversation to have with that, risking less to build and hope, or risking more to come down and then build. And I know over time, it won't matter, right? 44 inside, 10 times will lose the same amount of money that 220 inside for one roll will lose. It's not going to probably matter mathematically. It's a matter of risk and what
So
your brain is telling you.
yeah, we'll leave the details for another time. But when you do that, if you have the time, simulate both of those things in win craps and give it
Mm-hmm.
like just instead of having like a specific win goal, just do it for 100 or 200. Have every session just be like 100 rolls or 200 rolls or some not super long, and just log. I think you can do this. I'm not sure. I don't play with win craps, but log the final bankroll at the end of 200 rolls for both of those and give me
Sure.
the distributions, and then I will calculate the variance for you and tell you. We'll be able to say, I don't know off the top of my head, we'll be able to say, here is what the ending bankroll variance looks like for doing it this way versus this way. I feel like, I'm not sure on this, and I could be wrong, so this is only a guess. I think an informed guess, but a guess. I think the one that people will say is like trying to avoid the risk is going to end up being a lot riskier. I think
Yeah.
the ending bankroll variance for the put a bunch out there real quick and come down and be quote unquote playing for free or risk free after
Mm-hmm.
that point is going to wind up with a larger spread of ending bankroll outcomes for
Mm-hmm.
every, let's say, 200 rolls or like a normal crap session
Yeah.
worth of rolls or whatever. I don't know if that's true. That's my intuition is
I
telling me that's true,
suspect
but
it.
it would be interesting to know, because I
I
think that kind
suspect
of
it too.
proves the point of you thought you were. We started this whole thing with this discussion about distributions. It's a perfect little end cap
Mm-hmm.
or whatever to put on it.
Yep.
You started this strategy with the idea of avoiding risk, and what you actually did was take on more. I think that's going to be the conclusion, which I think is a really informative thing, and really, like, if people will take that to heart, again, do whatever you
Yeah.
want to with your money. That's always my final point on everything. But that's information that I think people don't understand, or maybe we could help contextualize it for them in a way.
I think
that
that's,
would,
I have no idea what's going to happen, but I suspect that going big for one roll to come down is going to end up being worse than just starting down there out of the gate and taking your hits, taking your lumps on the early
think
sevens.
so. I don't know that, but I think so. And we can know for certain if you can log what I would like is if you would you run 10,000 sessions of 200 rolls a piece or whatever, where let the bankroll go wherever it's going to go, positive or negative or whatever, and just have no constraints and just log the ending bankroll every time. And then we will draw a distribution of the bankrolls and compare the distribution of these two strategies. And my guess is the one that people think is less risky turns out to be a bunch more risk, which is informative.
It'll be interesting.
That's my intuition.
I know already that about 23 to 24% of the time you get 0 box hits. We already know that. So that you can guarantee whatever that initial spread is, a quarter of the time you're going to lose it on the very first roll after the points hit. So it's going to be interesting. And I had never done the math on. I never tried to do a simulation on what's the better play. Build up to where you want to be, or regress down and start over.
I don't think we'll be able to say one of them is better than the other. I think we will be able to give people the context to say this one involves more volatility than this. And so if you're somebody who doesn't like volatility, don't do it this way. That's the irony of it all, is the people that are trying to avoid the volatility are taking it on without realizing. And I think we might be able to show that to them.
Yeah.
I doubt it'll change anybody's mind, but nothing does,
Well,
these are still facts.
Well, yeah. I mean, I did the whole thing on, should you work the come out or not? The answers are so clear not to work the come out if you're on place bets, but it's people will do what they're going to do anyway, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
I think it was pretty compelling. All right, let's cut it here. It's been a good hour and a half or so. Another one of our ramblers, right? Which is good. We can do this, dude, forever.
I know.
Yeah.
It felt like it was a little tighter in a good way, but we'll see. Yeah. I like to listen to it afterwards. So,
I'll send you a copy.
Yeah, if you would. Yeah. I know it's not going up for a while or whatever, but you got another episode coming out tonight, as of the recording anyway.
That's right. Yeah, Ken's coming out tonight. This will be out in a couple weeks. So cool.
Awesome, man.
All right, JB. Thanks so much.
Yeah, take care, bud. We'll talk later.
All right, man. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
See you.